Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Myers, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar for a teacher's best kept secret, interim assessments and tools for teachers, brought to you by the California Department of Education. This webinar is the fifth and last webinar in a series of Tools for Teachers shared practice webinars for this school year. Before we hand it off to our very knowledgeable presenters, we want to address a few housekeeping items. First, all participants are muted and the chat is turned off today. We will be collecting questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom. We will be dropping links into the chat though, so you'll be able to get those there. Please submit any questions that you have into the Q&A feature in Zoom, and the presenters will do their best to answer those at a few points throughout the presentation. We will also be putting a link to the Padlet in the chat. During today's webinar, you will find the slides in the Padlet, as well as all the materials that will be mentioned throughout today's webinar. The Padlet will remain available through the end of March. Soon you'll find a copy of today's slides on our upcoming training opportunities webpage on CAASPP.org and ELPAC.org. And we will be recording today's presentation with the archive of the presentation available for download on the CAASPP and ELPAC YouTube page and the CAASPP.org and ELPAC.org training opportunities pages. It usually takes a week or two after the meeting for this recording to be available. So with that, we will pass it over to our presenters for today. So please give a warm welcome to our first presenter, Tammy Saldana. Tammy, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Saldana. I am an education programs consultant at the California Department of Education, or CDE, in the Assessment Development and Administration Division. Welcome to today's webinar, A Teacher's Best Kept Secret, Interim Assessments and Tools for Teachers. There are two educators with me today who will be sharing how they use interim assessments along with the resources available on the Tools for Teachers website. We are hoping that you are able to take some of the ideas with you as your own secret to helping increase learning success in the classroom. Here's the agenda for today. First, I am going to provide a quick introduction to the components of the Smarter Balanced Assessment System, which include interim assessments and tools for teachers. Then my two guest presenters will be sharing their practices on how they use interim assessments and tools for teachers resources with their students. And we'll finish up with some time for questions and answers during our Q&A session. As we're presenting, you can submit your questions at any time in this webinar through the Q&A feature in Zoom. The Padlet has a link to the resources that we'll be talking about during our presentation. Before we begin, there are two quick things for our participants, a poll and a Padlet. A quick poll question is going to pop up on your screen asking who you are as far as your role in your district or school. We would like to take a quick peek at who is attending our webinar so we can keep that in mind as we present today. Our poll question is, which option best describes your role in your district or school? I'll pause for a minute. Boy, we have a lot of people answering. I'll wait about 30 more seconds. And it's slowing down now. We'll go ahead and we'll end our poll and take a look. Who is here today? It looks like 65%, most of you, are educators and teachers. That's great to hear because Tools for Teachers is a website about having tools for teachers to use. We also have some other roles in the room, and that is also good because we have something for everyone today. We have some great presenters that have great ideas for you to share with the teachers at your school site or district. Okay, Let's talk about our Padlet. The Zoom chat feature will only be used to drop in some links, and the major link that has all of our resources for this webinar is in our Padlet. So the Padlet link will be in your chat. So you'll answer or you'll ask questions and get answers through the Q&A feature. And before we hear from our guest presenters, let me quickly explain what we mean by interim assessments and tools for teachers. So California is a member of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. And part of our membership in this consortium is a comprehensive assessment system based on the state standards that Smarter Balance provides to all the members of that consortium. There are three components of this assessment system. We have the summative assessments, the interim assessments, and the formative assessment systems, part of the system that has instructional supports for implementing the formative assessment process. When all three of these components are implemented, they provide teachers with measures needed to help students reach college and career readiness. Smarter Balance and the CDE provide California educators the resources and data to support teaching and learning throughout the school year. So it's important to think about the school year here and how a lot of us focus on the summative assessment, that end of the year assessment that all the students are required to take. But there are two other components of the system: the interim assessments that can be used for checking student progress at any time throughout the school year, and the formative assessments that are used by teachers on a daily basis. The focus of today's webinar is the interim assessments and the formative assessment resources that are available to be used in the classroom. There are a couple things I'd like to go over quickly about the Smarter interim assessments. First, it's important to know that these are totally optional. They can be given at any time throughout the school year, and their purpose is to help teachers monitor their students' progress towards learning goals. The use of interim assessments is entirely a local decision. The state does not require the use of interim assessments. They are available year-round, and they are free of charge to all California public school educators, as they are included in our California paid membership in the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. Smarter Balance offers interim assessments for ELA, English Language Arts, and mathematics for grades 3 through 8 and high school. Teachers can choose to administer any interim assessment to any student in any grade level. And the last important note here is that not all people are aware. And so today we're spreading the word that interim assessments can be used with in a flexible manner. They can be administered to students in a standardized way and in a non-standardized manner. What do we mean by that? Here are two examples. These assessments can be given as an individual independent student test. So an interim assessment can be like a benchmark type of assessment or an assessment of learning. That's the standardized use of interim assessments. And they can also be used with a whole class. They can be displayed in front of a whole class or a group of students, and they can be discussed in a lesson activity. That's an example of the non-standardized use of interim assessments or assessments for learning. The standardized and non-standardized use of interim assessments will be shared today by our presenters. You may also need to know that there are three types of interim assessments that are available to teachers. As our presenters talk today, they may refer to different types of interim assessments. So here's a general overview. The ICAs are interim comprehensive assessments. They are the longest tests that measure the same breadth and depth of content as the end of the year summative assessments that students take. Now, the IABs are interim assessment blocks. These measure a smaller cluster of content or assessment targets and standards, about 3 to 8 targets. They're usually about anywhere from 6 to 18 questions. And the focused IABs measure an even smaller cluster of assessment targets and standards, about 1 to 3 academic targets. The focused IABs are about the same number of questions as the IABs. They're just more focused. These IABs, the focused ones, were added in response to educators' feedback on the need for assessing smaller amounts of academic content, which helps educators identify more specific areas of support that might be needed. Between these 3 types of interim assessments, there are over 220 interim assessments to choose from this school year. And the last component of this system I will introduce to you is tools for teachers. Today, you will hear our presenters talk about how they have used interim assessment data with teaching resources or lesson plans in the website Tools for Teachers. Tools for Teachers is just like the interim assessments. It's available for free to all California public school teachers. Teachers can self-register or use their TOMS login information they have received from their testing administrators. In fact, there is a full demonstration of the Tools for Teachers website in the first webinar of our series. If you want to see a full demo of Tools for Teachers, you can go into the Padlet, look under Other Resources, and you'll find a link to the CAASPP page, the Past Training and Opportunities and Materials webpage. And look for the first webinar in this series called Supporting English Learners with the Website Tools for Teachers. So that is for if you need to see a demo of the website Tools for Teachers. And there are a couple of key points to know about Tools for Teachers. All of the lesson plans on the website, they're called instructional resources. All of these lesson plans include formative assessment and accessibility strategies that are embedded right into the lesson plans. These strategies recommend ways for educators to provide instructional differentiation to meet diverse student needs. The website also houses a link to the interim assessment item portal for teachers who are given access by their districts to the interim assessments. And in Tools for Teachers, there are interim assessment connections playlists. These provide teachers with groups of lesson plans that focus on topics, skills, and content that are assessed by specific interim assessment blocks or IABs. So where do you go to find these things? CAASPP.org is the place to go where educators can access all of the components of the California's assessment system. On this website, educators can select the Tools for Teachers button, and there is a button for Smarter Balanced Interim Assessments to gain access to these parts of the assessment system. California uses a single sign-on system, which means that users can use the TOMS login, the Test Operations Management System, we just call it TOMS, login that they are provided by their administrators in order to enter Tools for Teachers and the interim assessments. They're a little bit different though. Tools for Teachers, it does have a self-registration available. So educators can use their district email to self-register for Tools for Teachers if they have not received a TOMS user login information yet. However, I should note that the interim assessments require administration permission to have access. Educators cannot self-register to have access to the interim assessments. Smarter Balanced interim assessments are considered secure. They're meant to be used with teachers and students only, with the teacher present at all times, and they should not be posted into third-party systems. So that is my introduction to the Smarter Balanced assessment system and some of the things that our presenters will be talking about today. And now for the best parts of this webinar, I have the pleasure to introduce to you the first presenter. His name is Matthew Fredericks. He is a 6th and 7th grade teacher from Ben Franklin Intermediate School in the Jefferson Elementary School District in Daly City. He is here today to share how he is using interim assessments and tools for teachers resources in a standardized manner in his math classroom. So I will turn this presentation over to Matt. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Tammy. I'd like to start with what brought me here today. So I'm a teacher at Ben Franklin Intermediate School. Our population is 624 students. 50% are considered socioeconomically disadvantaged, and about 35% are English language learners. We're located just south of San Francisco. Our school typically does poorly on our end of the year assessments. Over the years, we've received a lot of professional development on best practices for teaching math, but it's always felt like something was missing. When I questioned our new principal about it, he pushed the idea of data-driven instruction, meaning that we should use assessment results to make instructional decisions. We have a benchmark assessment tool that we currently use in our district, but it didn't seem to have any correlation with how we performed on state tests or summative tests. And more importantly, it didn't give us much information to work with. So we decided to look for another assessment tool to use every 4 to 5 weeks that measured student progress on grade level standards. Luckily, Smarter Balance was our first and only stop on this search. So after a lot of research into the tools that were available through Smarter Balance, I decided to try an FIAB. Tammy mentioned this in the different types of assessments. FIAB is short for Focus Interim Assessment Block. And the first one that I chose was place value from 5th grade. I was really impressed with the data and the efficiency, which I got it. And from there, we dove in and haven't looked back. So today I'm going to share with you how I've been using the interim assessments and the tools for teachers in my classroom. I'm by no means an expert, and I don't know how it will look at the end of the year, but I'm hoping that my experience will be helpful for you in some way. I want to preface all of this by saying it wasn't super easy for me to figure out how to use all of this. It's important to know that in order to get the assessment data as an educator, you'll need to have access to the Smarter Balance interim assessments to administer the test, and you'll need your students assigned to you in the California Educator Reporting System. Access to interims and groups of students in the system is provided through your district. I had to contact my administrators and go through a process to get access that I needed to see the interim assessment results in the reporting systems. Don't be afraid to ask questions to get the access you need, as the use of interims in the reporting system is done locally. So when I talk about standardized administration of the interim assessment, what I mean is students log in using their student state ID numbers, and I administer the test to them through their Chromebooks. They get zero help during the test because it's independent to see what they can do. Students take the FIAB as a pre-test, and then we have a period of instruction using the tools for teachers lessons and intervention strategies. After a designated period of time, we take the same FIAB as a post-test and we compare the results. Ideally, I can see both class and individual growth from the pre to the post-test. The results from the FIAB inform me about how my students are progressing towards grade level standards. The process of planning backwards from such a focused assessment has been beneficial for my students. And the pre-test shows me immediately who is ready for more of a challenge than what I have planned. It also shows me who will need stronger intervention than what the lessons have available. Initially, I planned to use our own district curriculum to teach the content. But my grade level partner and I found that the tools for teacher lessons were more focused and helpful in preparing students for the content assessed by the FIABs. On one of the next slides, I'm going to run through all the steps I take to access those lessons. Before I get to that video, I want to quickly point out a website that can be found on the Padlet. It's called the 2021-2022 Interim Assessments by Grade Level. This screenshot shows the top row of a list of focused IABs that focuses 1 to 3 targets for the 6th grade. The top row shows ratios and proportional relationships and includes the claim and target 1 and A, in addition to the total number of items or questions, 13, and how many of them are hand scored, 0 in this case. This website shows the tests that are available to you, and I've used it as sort of a scope and sequence for the year once I committed to using these interim assessments. They lined up nicely with the units that our district curriculum was already going over. On the next slide, I'm going to show you how to access, view, and download the assessments and the accompanying tools for teacher lessons. So this video is going to show you how to access a copy of each FIAB and then the lessons that accompany it. I want to mention that these lessons are not meant as a full curriculum. They're strong lessons that support questions on the FIAB, but I spend a lot of time figuring out what my students know and then filling in the gaps between the lessons with other resources that I find or that I create.
Welcome everyone. I made this video to show how I access and use the Tools for Teachers resources that support the formative interim assessment blocks. You're currently looking at my pre-assessment results from my geometry unit on the California Educator Reporting System. As I scroll down, I'm displaying how many out of my 27 students scored above standard, near standard, and below standard. This page also shows me how many students, how students performed on each question. For example, as I scroll down, you can see that 0 students got full credit on questions number 10, 11, and 12. When planning my unit, I always work backwards from the tests and ask myself what students will need to know. I'm going to first show you how to print or download a PDF of the FIAB. It's the same site that has lessons to prepare students for the questions on the FIAB. It's called Tools for Teachers. To access it, I'm going to go to the CAASPP homepage, where you're going to see 8 green buttons. And I'm going to go to the top right button called Tools for Teachers. This will open a new tab where there's one green button that says Tools for Teachers. Click this button and it brings me to the Tools for Teachers website, which I'm automatically logged into because my district has provided access to me. There's a rollover menu on the left where I'm going to click Interim Connections Playlist. This will bring me to this screen, the Interim Connections Playlist webpage, where you're going to need to scroll down to where it says Start Using Playlists. I'm going to select Mathematics in grade 6, and then I'll select Go. This brings me to a screen where it says Found 12 Resources, and as you scroll down, you're going to find all the different playlists that go with each FIAB. My current unit is geometry, so I'll find that Interim Connections playlist and I'll click it. And this brings me to the Interim Connections playlist geometry website. Now, to download and to print the interim items, you're going to click this blue View Interim Items button on the top right, which will bring you to a screen that says the Interim Assessment Item Portal. Everything's been pre-filled for you. Grade 6 mathematics, it'll have the tests ready for you. And as you scroll down, you'll see each question on the FIAB as a thumbnail. You can view each question, but what I do is I press the button that says Select All, and then you'll see the green circle that tells you that all 11 questions have been put into your cart. Select the Print Cart button. Scroll down to make sure you have all 11 questions on this print cart page and select the blue Next button on the bottom right. This last page on the print cart, on the bottom it has print options and a drop-down menu where I'm going to select Answer Key and Items. I like to have the answers as part of it. And from here what I do is I'll press this blue button on the bottom right that says Print to PDF. I can't click it now because these are secure items that I can't show you, but that's how you get it. Now, going back to this geometry page for the Interim Connections playlist, I can scroll down here and I can see the lessons that are available from Smarter Balance. So the top 2 lessons that are linked are Area and Real Life and Volume Matters. As I scroll down further, I can see there are 2 future resources, which means these lessons have not been fully created yet, they're not available. Also on this page, as I scroll down, I see suggestions for intervention. I find this to be particularly helpful, especially in this unit, because my students actually aren't ready for those lessons yet since I've looked through them. So one of the things that we've been working on, which is listed in this intervention list, is finding the area of rectangles, squares, and triangles so that they can be ready for these lessons. Now, I'm going to go back to the top of this page and I'm going to click on one of the lessons, Area in Real Life. It'll open in a new tab where you'll see a lesson plan step by step, and it has all the attachments. You can skip to the attachments, which is what I typically do by pressing this blue attachments button. I'll download each one to my desktop, and since we're a Google Apps for Education school, I typically will download them and then upload them into a Google Drive folder. So now I'm showing you this Google Drive folder, which has all the resources from the Area in Real Life lesson, in addition to the resources for the volume matters and the PDF of the FIAB. It can be a little challenging to put the time in to figure out how to navigate all these screens, but we've had enough success in my class that it's fully justified all the effort.
Okay, so once I kind of figured out how to navigate through everything, it was really coming down to the data that we were getting. So what I'm showing you here is a SIRS screenshot from my first period class. It shows a pre and post test, the assessment results ranging from October 12th, 2021 to October 28th, 2021. The test was called One Variable Expressions and Equations Focused IAB. We were happy to see that the October 18th average scale score raised 51 points from 2,550 to 2,601. I also want to note that the below standard went from 28% to 4%, and the above standard went from 20% to 38% for grade level, which is for grade level. The information has been easy for students to digest, and they were pretty hooked quickly on the feedback. So with each successive FIAB unit, students improved their scores and became more and more motivated to do well. So one way I knew that it was working is even if one student did not see individual growth, they could pretty clearly see that the whole class was growing. One of the best impacts from this data has been student confidence. Here's a screenshot from one of the FIAB post-tests that shows student performance on difficult questions. It lists the item number, the claims and targets, the item difficulty, the standard, and the percentage of students that got the item correct. I show this to my students and they feel their hard work is rewarded when they see high percentage of classmates succeeding with difficult math. My administrators love this part too because it fits in well with their emphasis on rigor. After the post-test, we take time to analyze questions that many students got incorrect. In SIRS, I can go through each student response to the question to find common mistakes. I typically copy and paste student answers and display them to show how small differences influence correct and incorrect answers in our scores. In this picture, we notice that the way we wrote equations determined if students got credit or not. There are two equations written above the purple incorrect sign that use a period as notation for multiplication. Students wrote this because it was how I was writing it in Google Classroom. Below, there are two equations written above the yellow correct sign that use a star as notation for multiplication, or simply put the number 5 next to the variable b. This was a great learning experience for us to figure out how much the details matter when performing mathematics and taking computer tests. Our district has pushed growth mindset into our classrooms over the last 10 years. It's a great message, but students need to feel success for the mindset to take hold. I take time to shout out and celebrate students who performed well. That might be a high score or a large improvement from the pre to the post test. Typically eat popcorn and watch a movie, or even sometimes get a visit from our principal to encourage us. In addition to tracking the group growth, I also look to see how many questions each student got correct on the pre-test and the post-test. This is not a perfect representation of their score because each question is weighted differently, but it makes more sense to students than the scaled scores do, which are a bit more abstract. This list I make personally, and it's not available on the reporting site. The list on this slide shows number of items students got correct on the pretest compared to the post-test. It also shows the improvement or lack thereof when comparing this metric. The bottom two scores show two different tales. One student had 4 correct items on the pretest and then 12 correct items on their post-test. They improved greatly. The bottom row shows a student who went from 9 items answered correctly on the left to 5 items answered correctly, an improvement of -4. This student was chosen for an intervention class and had a slight schedule change. The student has since made huge gains on the following assessment cycles after we were able to identify them and then make adjustments. I typically go over this information with students while we are taking time to celebrate by having individual conferences with them. Students have responded well to this accountability and have been very proud of their individual growth. Overall, I've been very pleased with how this year has gone, and I know so much more about my students' abilities and needs than I ever have before. The pre and post-test cycles helped me establish grade level expectations with students and have focused our math goals. The FIAB tests and units have built on each other in a way that make the next unit seem equally relevant. Learning loss from earlier in the year has diminished greatly as well. Students get immediate feedback on their performance while the test is still fresh in their mind. Using the online Smarter Balance interim assessments gives my students familiarity with the online testing system as they see the same types of questions, how they look, and how they're answered at the end of the year. Most importantly, using the FIABs has helped create a strong class culture for us. Students want to know how they did on their pre-assessments and their post-assessments. I have a number of students who don't much care about getting an F on their report card, but who take these results very seriously for their FIABs. I see this as building positive class culture with accountability and confidence for my students, and it's been a great tool for collaboration between me and my grade level partner. We'll see if there's much difference in the end of the year summative test results, but so far we've been very encouraged. Thanks for listening. I'm going to pass the mic over to Tammy, who will introduce Nancy.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing with us how you're using the interim assessments and tools for teachers in your classroom. Now, remember when I said that interim assessments can be used in flexible ways? So Matt was choosing to use interim assessments as a pre and post test, which is the standardized manner of using interim assessments. And now we're going to hear about some non-standardized ways of using interim assessments and the tools for teachers resources. I have the pleasure of introducing Nancy Veach from Evergreen Union School District. She is the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services and the principal of Bend Elementary School. I'll now turn it over to Nancy. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Tammy. So yes, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about how you can use them in a different way. And I noticed on the poll that we did right at the beginning, about 75% of you that are joining in today were all teachers in the classroom. And so this is a way for you to be able to see how you can use this, but about 25% were instructional coaches or administrators. And so with my administrator hat on, I kind of want to explain what this might look like from that perspective as well. So a little bit about my district. Evergreen Union School District is a 5-school district located in northern Tehama County. We cover a geographic area of about 575 square miles. And our northern boundary is the Shasta-Tehama line, and we're bordered on the east by the Sacramento River and on the west by the Shasta, Trinity, and Tehama boundaries. We serve nearly 1,350 students daily throughout our various schools and programs. We serve preschool through 12th grade. 56% of our students are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and 4% are English learners. All children can learn, and together we make the difference is our vision statement. We believe that every student is capable of learning, and that it is the responsibility of the school system to ensure that the student has the opportunity to realize his or her full potential. So we bring that into this presentation today. So a little bit about our practice. Interim assessments can be given in a non-standardized format, and this is how we chose to use them this past fall. So a little bit about what a non-standardized format is. It's when you're giving an assessment for learning. They can be used during daily instruction, and it informs the instructional decisions that teachers make. The way that it connects for tools for teachers is that teachers are able to, with the opportunity to review their assessment results and then select the appropriate resources out of tools for teachers to attend to those needs. In the non-standardized administration, there's many ways that it can be given. It might be a teacher leading a large group and working through the task together. It might be a teacher leading a small group of students at a circular table and providing additional supports with the task. For example, if we take the English language arts performance task, it might include starting at the beginning, reading the directions together and talking about what needs to be done. Then working together through the close reading of all of the passages, modeling for students how to note take and how to note make, and practice how to draft thoughtful and thorough responses to the brief rights. In the second part of the performance task, it might mean reading the directions together and discussing what needs to be done. And then working together through that writing to craft a thoughtful, longer response that attends to all the dimensions that are noted within the rubric. This can then be followed by an exploration in tools for teachers to determine which resource lessons would best help the needs of the students in the entire class or in the small group at this point in time. So just share with us, if you wouldn't mind, have you used the interim assessment performance tasks in this non-standard type of format? So there's going to be a poll that pops up. And if you would select yes, no, or you're not sure, and I'll take a brief pause while we wait to hear if you've used them in this manner. All right, so hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to share whether or not they've used that, and let's look at our results. And it looks like we've had about 35% of our audience today has had the opportunity to use them in a non-standardized manner. So we're super excited because this just today will provide you yet another opportunity to see how it can be used. And for all of our participants who haven't had the opportunity, we hope today this will give you some ideas of how you can use it. So as we moved into how do you use this in a non-standardized format, the number one thing we needed to do was make sure that staff was supported in this process. So kind of as Matt shared, you have to be able to go in and know how to access the interim assessment item portal. They had to be able to decide which interims they could choose. And a link to this viewing system can be found in Padlet. We also knew as an admin team that there were other things that we needed to make sure we reviewed with our staff. We had to make sure that we looked at the claims and the targets for the ELA performance task. Remember, the short answer responses in the interim assessment questions, they provide teachers with information about students' understanding of how to research. The full write gives information about students' writing. This can be kind of a sticky spot because oftentimes we would think that in the short answer responses, we're also looking and scoring student writing. But really, this is where we would just focus on research. And so we felt that as an admin team, it was really important to review these claims, these targets, and how they connect to that overall task before we moved through into using them with students. Next, there were additional things that we needed to consider in supporting staff. We knew that teachers needed to spend time delving deep into the performance task scoring dimensions. So together, we spent time reviewing the rubrics that correspond with the performance task writing genre, whether it was narrative, opinion or argument, or explanatory or informational, and then the dimensions that exist within each of those ELA rubrics, the organization and purpose of that particular piece of writing, the evidence and elaboration, and also the conventions, paying particular attention to the holistic scoring that needs to happen with conventions. We also, of course, had to make sure that all of our teachers had access to tools for teachers. They knew how to get in and access the system so that they could have the supports they needed to navigate that site. Of course, having teachers be ready for giving the assessment in a non-standardized format, we also had to consider student experience with it. We had to think and understand that students that have lived through the pandemic over the past several years have to really have some things adjusted for them. We had to know that providing the fall interim assessment in these grade spans needed to be given in a non-standardized format when looking at the ELA performance task. So if you consider for a minute a 5th grade student who's sitting in a classroom today, they didn't take the assessment in the spring of 2020 because our students were on distance learning, March through June. Then in the spring of 2021, those students did take an assessment. It was in person, but it was after they had spent a long span of time in distance learning. Fast forward to the spring of 2022, which the assessment is just around the corner. These students will again take the adjusted assessment in person, but that's after a year filled with quarantines where they've been in and out of independent study. And so we really felt like it was essential that we provide an opportunity for them to take the ELA performance task in a non-standardized way. Likewise, our 4th graders, they've only ever seen the adjusted assessment they took in the spring of 2021 as 3rd graders. And after spending much of the year in distance learning, this upcoming year, they're also going to take that adjusted assessment again. So we considered the impact that the pandemic and subsequent school closures had had on our systems. And we really felt like providing teachers with the opportunity to administer the ELA performance task in a non-standardized administration would be best for everyone, for all of our students and for our teachers in those particular grade ranges. Students really need an authentic opportunity to interact with the performance task with supports in place of a caring teacher who's going to help guide them through it so that they can understand what is going to be asked of them this spring when the task is in front of them. So what did our teachers do? They needed to select a performance task. And so our staff used these handy assessments at a glance so that they could determine which performance task they wanted to use. The link to these can be found in Padlet, and I would encourage you to do these. Our 3rd grade teachers had the opportunity to pick from either a narrative or an opinion task, but they made the decision to go with the opinion task because that was what genre of writing they were currently working on. As teachers then began to work with their students through this non-standardized administration, the very first stop was with the Smarter Annotated Response tool. It is a website that shows student writing samples for the ELA performance tasks. And then a scoring is connected to the dimensions on the rubric. You can find a link to this in Padlet. This that you're seeing here is a 3rd grade example of opinion writing about islands. In this annotated response, the student scores a 2 out of a 4 on evidence and elaboration. The teachers who shared this with their students were able to highlight how this particular student used evidence from the source material. In this example, the evidence, meaning the facts and details, were weakly integrated, imprecise, repetitive, vague, and/or copied. You'll notice in paragraph 1, the details are plants and animals. Could see a chimpanzee in your backyard, waterfalls, mountains, hill, and others have a mix of high and low spots. And those particular details are highlighted right in that student response. So the teacher was able to review this with their class and bring out for students to see that there are appropriate details used, but they're not attributed to both sources. So teachers were able to show students the importance of including details and facts from both sources when completing their full write. Once teachers took some time to look at samples of student writing, they jumped into experiencing the performance task. But again, in a non-standardized format, you're not going to have students work on this independently. So consider what third grade teachers did. First, they read and discussed the task together, writing down together what is being asked of you. Then read the two sources, answer the questions, and write the long response. Then they took opportunities to actually do those things with students, guiding them through the process, teaching them how to pull out information that could be referenced later, followed by working through and creating quality responses together for the short answer prompts. Finally, teachers led students in reviewing the assignment directions for part 2 and completed the writing together that addressed whether or not they should keep a beetle or put it back where they found it. Our 4th and 5th grade teachers did variations of this level of support for their students as they walked through the performance task together. This graphic of the formative assessment process that you can find in Tools for Teachers shows that the cycle of formative assessment can begin at any stage: interpreting, acting on, clarifying, and eliciting evidence about student growth and learning. When giving an assessment that is out of the interims as an assessment for learning, like we did with our students in the performance task we gave this fall, we began by interpreting evidence that teachers gathered from observing students in this process of engaging and grappling with a performance task in a non-standardized format, and then moved into the following steps after that. They considered the evidence gathered during the time and understood these students really need additional support with finding evidence embedded within the text. So what did they do next? They turned to Tools for Teachers. And the instructional next steps were go into Tools for Teachers and begin to look at what lesson resources could support all of the students in their class and how they could help them grow in this area. Here's an example of what was used as a lesson resource: painting a clear picture with details. In this support lesson, teachers are provided with the opportunity to help students build extensions beyond the text by helping them practice using descriptive language. As the teachers moved through the Tools for Teachers resource lesson, whereby they clarified the learning goals, established the success criteria, and then elicited evidence of learning with additional student writing, the cycle then continued. Both the interim assessments used in a non-standardized format, in conjunction with using the resources out of Tools for Teachers, can have a great impact on student learning and ensure that teachers have the tools they need to help students improve their writing overall, as well as find more success on highlighting this skill on the upcoming spring CAASPP. So for us, it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to engage in a non-standardized format. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tammy.
Thank you, Nancy. We are so appreciative of you and Matt for sharing your practices of what we playfully called secrets to using interim assessments and Tools for Teachers resources with students. We have some questions that are in the Q&A that we might want to go over. The first one that I noticed is we had quite a few questions about getting access to the interim assessment items. Interim assessment access is provided through your district. It is a local decision how to use interim assessments, and most teachers use their TOMS login that they receive from their administration. So if you're interested in gaining access as an educator, you need to contact your district testing coordinator and find how to get access to those interim assessments. Because they are considered secure, as I mentioned earlier. Let me think of another question here. A lot of people talked about the video, and they would like, there's two videos. The one that Matt played using how he used the interim assessment item portal and the resources, the lesson plans and tools for teachers. In the Padlet, we have a link to all of these slides, but the video created it became too large. So the video that Matt made will be part of the full demonstration, the full webinar that will be posted in 1 to 2 weeks on the CAASPP Past Training Opportunities and Materials website. So if you go into the Padlet site, you'll see other resources. We've listed in there the titles of the previous 4 webinars. There's 5 total of teachers and educators and district people that are sharing how they use tools for teachers and other formative assessment resources. And so we listed those webinars, and there's a link to the CAASPP Training Opportunities and Materials website. So 1 to 2 weeks, you'll get Matt's video along with this video of this entire webinar. How do you see student scores after taking an interim test? This is important to know, because I talked about the 3 types of interims, and after you've gained access to those interims, you can administer one. And if you've chosen an IAB or ICA or focused IAB that has no hand scoring, and the students submit the test, it should go directly to the California Educator Reporting System, also known as CERS. And in that reporting system, you will see the IAB results, along with the summative assessment results from previous years. CERS, the California Educator Reporting System, will be is the spot to see summative and interim assessment results. Now, if there's a full write, if there's a question where students are answering and having to type in their answer, that will go to the teacher hand scoring system, where the teacher can go in, read what each student, how they responded, and score that. So that is how you see the interim assessment results in the reporting system. And remember, within the reporting system are links to Tools for Teachers. And in Tools for Teachers, there are connections playlists, which are groups of lessons that connect back to the content that is assessed on a specific interim assessment block, what Matt was showing you earlier. Okay, so I'm looking at any other questions that we might have. We have a lot of questions about interim assessments for science and ELPAC. It's in the works. We are working and we are planning to get interim assessments for science. We have a lot of excitement about it, and for ELPAC, and that will be implemented, hopefully ready to go on the 2023-24 school year. So 2023. So not quite ready yet, but coming your way soon. Can you see results from previous years of how students respond? Yes, every IAB that a student has taken, or ICA, would be in the California reporting system. Is CERS the same as Smarter Reporting California? So Smarter Balance is, we're in the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, and within that consortium are different members, different states, and there's different versions of the reporting system. For instance, in our reporting system, we have some California-made assessments, our ELPAC, for instance, our science test. So in our reporting system, which is part of Smarter Balance, we have our California assessments in there. So we call it CERS, the California Educator Reporting System. And remember, at the beginning of my presentation, I said CAASPP.org is the place to start. It's where you can access all of these things. You can access these things through CAASPP.org and ELPAC.org. If you're having difficulty seeing results after implementing an IAB, you should contact your testing coordinator, whether it's a site coordinator or an whoever is your CAASPP coordinator would be your first stop for finding why your results are not showing in STRS. And that person can take it further as far as escalating it to other places to find out, to troubleshoot. We have a lot of questions about using, when do I use an IAB? When, things like that. I said at the beginning that IABs and ICAs and all of these interim assessments are totally a local decision. So I know that there's some districts that have said, we're all our third grade teachers are going to do this one, IAB, and we're going to compare results and talk about it. And then some districts are, as a teacher, you're on your own. So as Matt was talking about, he discovered them on his own. So it's a local decision, and but they are available to all California public school teachers for free. So in Tools for Teachers, the lesson plans that are available are tied to the interim assessment blocks, and they're all written for the content that is assessed, right? And each resource is written by teachers, a group of teachers. It has a very, it's a complicated process. It's not just something somebody wrote a lesson plan and put it up. There's a very big process that they go through to make sure that we have quality resources that are covering our standards, as well as good teaching practices. And in these resources, they're all written to grade level, and they're using the Universal Design for Learning concept. And in the lesson plans are links to differentiation strategies, such as the formative assessment strategies and accessibility strategies, as well as things to consider and instructional moves. And they're all focused on the formative assessment process, meaning that during instruction, the teacher's checking in with students, seeing where they're at, gathering evidence, interpreting that, and providing some actionable feedback, and making sure that they're clarifying learning and going through the whole process of making sure that learning is progressing. So that's how those lessons are designed. So we have people asking, are there specific lessons for ELD? Are there specific lessons for special ed? The answer is no, because every resource is designed with the idea of meeting diverse learner needs. Okay. Nancy and Matt, is there any questions that you would like to speak to at this point? We have 2 more minutes left.
I don't think so. I think my advice to everyone is don't be afraid to get in there and play with it. As from the administrator viewpoint, and watching Matt be able to just dive in and play with it individually, it can give you such great feedback and such great information. So don't be afraid, explore, and sign up for as many of these presentations as you can, because that can be super helpful.
And Matt, did you have anything?
No, not really. A lot of it was trial and error, and I think for me, just kind of making it work for me and what my kids needed and what we needed at our site. I don't think it has to be done in any one specific way.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Amy.
We want to thank you all for attending this webinar, and also for our presenters that all did a wonderful job today. This wraps up this school year's Tools for Teachers Shared Practice webinar series. You can view the videos and see the materials from previous webinars on the CAASPP Past Training Opportunities and Materials webpage. A link to that page is in the Padlet under the other resources. And in about 2 weeks, we will have the video for this webinar posted there, and that will include Matt's video in it if you would like to watch that again. We have good news. We are planning to continue the Tools for Teachers Shared Practice series next school year. So be sure to look for the webinar series in the fall. We look forward to seeing you all next year. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.